Hey everyone, my name is Catherine Tao and I'm the host of the Data Standard Audio Experience. And today we have an amazing guest. We have David Herberich, the head of data and behavioral science at Branch. And today we're going to be speaking about data science as a product parameter. So welcome to the show, David. I'm very excited to speak with you and just learn more about your journey.
Thanks for having me, Catherine.
Yeah. And so you had mentioned to me that you have a very unique experience with getting into data science, coming from more of an economic background. And so can you tell me more about your journey and what got you interested in data science? How did it all start?
Yeah, it goes all the way back to when I was out of undergrad working with Excel. And it's kind of probably not that unique anymore, but it was just looking for things that I could automate so that I didn't have to spend time doing it, whether it's an optimization routine, whether it's using my matrix algebra in Excel. And that led me going into an applied econ program, which was interesting because it really pushed the econometrics and the modeling side. But a good deal of what I do now is related to one professor in particular, John List, who's now at U Chicago. He really got me excited about experimental methods and how to apply experiments in firms. And that really solidified how to think about exogenous shocks and things like that. And that led me to a variety of things since then, up to the point where I am now at Branch, which is trying to apply even some of that research from 10 years ago and to try to help our users make stronger financial decisions.
That's awesome. And so for your specific position, it encompasses data science and behavioral science. And so my question to you is how do these two relate to each other for the specific work that you do?
Yeah, I mean, the direct link, it's probably obvious for most of the audience, I think. I mean, behavioral data is what a lot of companies work with. And behavioral data gets very big, it gets very complex, and you want to do a lot of modeling on it. In the case of Branch, so Branch is an employer payments platform. And what we're really focused on is how to get workers paid very quickly, but also how to help them make stronger financial decisions. That's one side of what we do on the behavior side comes in, which is looking at their behavior and trying to think about how do we encourage them to make smarter decisions? How do we help them grow financially? Now, that being said, there's a big area in fintech of fraud management, and that's where behavioral data and data science really combine. And that's probably a use case that people are very familiar with, which is if you're sitting on this data, you're thinking about how do I model this data to establish typical behavior for these users? And if it deviates strongly from that, it potentially is fraud, let's act on it and things like that. So that of course is in the realm of what's out there, but the added element, at least at Branch, is thinking about that from sort of the positive or growth side, which is thinking about how do we actually help our users have stronger financial behaviors. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great to hear. So from your experience, how is data science used as a product parameter and what are some of the benefits that you've seen with this?
Data science as a product parameter is something that landed in my mind about 2 years ago. So I've been doing some form of data science for a long time, potentially before it was known as data science. Back in the day when I was doing price optimization at Sears up north of Chicago, that's sort of when the term data science started to hit the market 10 years ago or so. And in all that time, I bounced around a lot of different team organizations and team structures and designed some teams myself and thought through things. And I don't think there's one team structure out there for a data science team or a data team. I think it does depend on the size of the organization, the stage of the organization, and what they're trying to get done. But the one thing I do land on pretty heavily now is it comes down to thinking about data science informing a product parameter as a way to really make it more clear to the company what they're providing. So easy examples that a lot of people understand is if you think about the recommendation algorithms that are out there or the pricing that you see at large e-commerce sites, those are parameters in a product. If you think about the larger product, it's a much larger ecosystem of things, but there's most likely a data science team behind that thinking about how they're modeling it to output a change in that parameter. They're going to oscillate the price slightly, or they're going to change what you're going to see in that recommendation. And that kind of parameter tuning, I think, is crucial in terms of the design of the org structure about how you think about where data science fits in. I think that's one of the big benefits that at least helps me think about how data science teams are structured in large organizations, is thinking about it from a parameter setting. Now that notion of product parameter, obviously there's a whole nother, in my mind at least, there's a whole nother leg to data science, which is the A/B testing and the internal data product output. And that notion of product parameterization changes there, which is typically then it becomes a world of, well, your output is different. Your output is more towards data as an output. It might be a report, it might be a presentation, it might be a visualization, but you're not necessarily changing the product parameter. You're trying to influence some change someplace else. And it becomes a slightly different focus and a way to think about how that data science team gets leveraged inside the organization.
Awesome. And just so for my understanding, so do you work with small companies and big companies and everything combined?
Yes, branch, there's quite a different array of company sizes
That's
that as long as,
awesome. Yeah.
yep.
And so for when you're working with these product parameters, is it different for when you work with smaller companies versus bigger companies, or is it kind of similar?
I mean, the big thing on if you're going to create a model and push it into production and have it actually leverage, it's going to matter how much data is behind it. So if you're sitting on not much data and it's very challenging, in my experience, you're going to do a much less either sophisticated model, or you might even get just based down to rules and just do some work on the side and figure out, okay, just to get started, let's use rules to dictate what that parameter setting is, versus when you have a lot more data churning through the system and you're able to actually use models more heavily or rerun those models more often, et cetera. And that to me is really the distinction between a large versus a small company.
Awesome explanation. And so when you're working with these different users, different clients, what does a successful product or project look like to you?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, because I think in both cases, whether it's a product or a project, and if we differentiated that, it goes back to the notion of data product, which I think there's internal and external. So I think of a product as being an external data product, and that in line of more of the data parameterization of the product, versus a project, which is probably more internal focused. And the interesting thing about a project that's slightly different, in both cases, the visibility and reproducibility at the end of the day is what for me defines success. But when it's an internal project, if you're going to make something visible, that's a bad result. Like, okay, we just dove really deep. We did a bunch of modeling and we figured out that we've been down for the past 2 months in a very specific area for a specific reason. That's a good result. Finding something bad is a good result in that case, if it's an internal project, as long as it's clear and it's reproducible. So it's visible, it's reproducible, you can stand on it, let's move forward. Now, of course, that changes when it's a product, not a project. When it's external, you really heighten the focus on, okay, we're trying to make the user experience better, we're trying to make the product better. So there's more of a focus on, okay, things should be improving. And sure, if we find something bad, let's adjust it. But again, to me, the success goes back to, you don't want people to be surprised. So it's got to be visible. And you also still need to make sure that it's reproducible, so that if you want to change that product parameter, there's always support. There's always something you can point to and say, I can reproduce those results. Here's why we did that. Let's move forward. So I think that's why, because it's less about sort of the up and to the right graph versus the visibility and reproducibility.
Yeah, and that's awesome. And do you have any last advice for anyone who's trying to get into the data science field from a more non-traditional path?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think the way I'll take non-traditional here is just people are curious about data science increasingly. And there's two sides to a conversation. I'm not going to call this an argument, that I feel like I get into once in a while, which is the two sides are, is data science a tool set, or is it a way of asking questions? Now, given my background in econ, I'm heavily on it's a way of asking questions side. I think about, there's a tool set out there, great. But data science increasingly is about, how do you ask questions? How do you look for exogenous variation? How do you set up exogenous variation in experimental design? How do you do that? And the tool set is fine. And I think that's one area of advice that I'd put out there is, if you're trying to get into data science, don't focus all your energy on running a super complicated routine. Don't focus all your effort on the tool set. Really find a business question or a question you're interested in and attack it, because that's going to be much more interesting and it's going to enlighten you. If you can attack that question and answer it more simply, awesome. And then you can get more sophisticated over time. But I think that's one trapping that people find coming from outside of data science or outside of very heavy backgrounds. They get tripped up with, I want to learn how to run X model or X routine. And they lose sight of, well, the purpose of running that is to answer a question. And how do you structure that question becomes very, very important. Now, you need to, in the end of the day, ideally, you know both, but don't get tripped up. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's a great way to kind of think about data science as these two different kind of buckets. I think that's something that people don't really think about. So that's an awesome perspective.
Yeah, it comes up a decent amount. I've been at a couple of meetups where people take a hard stance on data science is just a set of tools. It's like, it's just not. There's a way of thinking that really is much more valuable in the end of the day. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you so much for David being on our show today. It was so great speaking with you and just learning more about your experiences with data science and how you got to this specific position that you're at today. We at the Data Standard, we're trying to build a community of data thought leaders, data enthusiasts, so that everybody has a place where they can connect and collaborate with each other. So what is something that we can do for you?
One thing I was thinking about the other day is in the past, I've been involved in good risk salon groups that were sort of work across companies. And I don't know of one for sort of behavioral and experimental in fintech. And if anybody out there knows about anything, please reach out to me. Or if anybody out there is really motivated and wants to try to work with me to start something, I'm very interested. I think there's some good war stories we could start sharing across companies in fintech to think about how do we approach these problems.
Yeah, and that's great. Just building up the community just more, and that's awesome. So where can a community find you online to connect with you?
I'm not too active, but Twitter is probably the best. So at Dherbie, Dherbie. I don't post that often. However, I do have now a running thread that I post on about every other year, which is Hug a Data Engineer, because they're really the the people that are behind everything that we do. So yeah.
Yeah. And to our viewers, for more information on the data standard, you can find us at www.datastandard.io. And this episode is sponsored by Pandio. They're innovating the tech space with their Apache Pulsar messaging system. So learn more about their work at pandio.com. And thank you so much, David, for joining us. So great to speak with you and hope to speak to you again soon.
Yeah, thanks a lot. This was fun. Thanks a lot, Catherine.